Well, we're getting ready to cut a big hole in that nice deck that we just put on there. So I went around and I trimmed up all the sides, and it's not because I'm in a rush to make it look pretty, because we've got a long way to go before we get there. But what I am very conscious of doing is making this centered on the boat. So there's a couple of things that I did. First off, when we send you plans and patterns, it's got a number of lines on the cockpit. One is the forms that went across the boat, right? So that gives you some kind of a visual aid, especially if you use staples. You can use that as a visual aid to line that up with the staples. Two is it's got a center line right down the middle. So when you pull a string from one end to the other and then pull it down tight to the boat and get it nice and centered on the boat, you just simply have to line up that center line. So then what I'm recommending that you do is always take a ruler and measure from these lines that we have where the forms are out to the end of the boat on each side. And you should be 1/8 of an inch or less off. You know, the boat's gonna flex and change a little bit, and it's never gonna be perfect because it's not popping out of a mold, right? So just make sure that you're relatively and reasonably close. Once you get all that set, it's just a matter of strapping on some nerve and starting to cut into that deck. So the last thing that I'm going to do is cut a little hole right here, and just because I'm paranoid, I'm going to throw a tape measure up, make sure that I'm good to go with the deck here and the bulkheads to make sure that they're not even close. But if all my measurements went correct, I should be just fine. All right, when you're doing this, you're going to be using a jigsaw, probably, unless you have another favorite tool to use. Make sure you're using a fine woodworking blade, not a big rough cut or a rip blade, because it'll start to tear at it and pull it up and down. You don't want that to happen. The other thing I'm going to do is, as I am cutting through here, you know, everybody tells you make sure you keep your saw flat to the wood. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be keeping it what I believe to be is parallel all the way around, so that when I'm done, I have a straight up and down cut no matter where I am. So that's going to require me to tilt and cant the saw as I'm going. And if you've got a fine blade on there, it's going to be small and flexible, so don't try to go too fast because it will bend. Just go nice and slow all the way around the outside. Okay, well, I've done my measurements. I got 2 inches to spare back here, just like I'm supposed to. That's a good thing. So now I can go ahead and take this string, get it out of my way. And I've got some scrap wood here that I'm going to need as I go along, because this thing's going to want to just flop down and fall in. You don't want that to happen because it will tear off as you get towards the end. It'll tear off and it'll just create a mess. You don't want that to happen. So I got some scrap pieces of wood ready here, so as I cut around I can reach under and support it. All right, I'm just going to grab my saw and very slowly go around the edge of this thing. Well, there you go, a piece of string, some tape, a pattern, and a jigsaw, and nerves of steel, and out she comes. Now we can actually see the inside of our boat again. Okay, well I just got this little 2-inch area here I gotta clean up. And then we're going to get ready to start to put the coaming on our cockpit, which is pretty simple, but it's time consuming, so charge up your music player. And get a cup or whatever it is you like to drink, because it's going to take a while. We're going to put little pieces of wood all the way around this thing, and it's going to take probably at least a couple hours for you to do that. Okay, this next process is a bit tedious, but it's got to be done. And what we're doing is we're making basically a cowling for our cockpit here. And then on top of that, we're going to put a ring around it, and it's just a multiple step process here. And the first step is we need to get a ring all the way around here, and we're going to use, this is about 1 3/4 by a 1/4 inch piece of strip. That's all. And we're going to start by using hot glue right along the base. Not a big gob, just a little bit. And we're going to start right here up front in the middle And we're going to put a little piece of strip right there. Okay, now during this process, it's going to be a little bit flimsy, so you're going to have to be careful. But as we go along, we gain strength because we put all these and then we fiberglass the inside ring, which fiberglasses them all together. And then we're going to put a bead all the way around it, and that'll make it nice and strong to the hull. And then, of course, we're going to put our coaming all around that. And all these little things add up to make a really nice, strong coaming bit. All right, so once you get the first one on there, a couple things you need to be concerned with is make sure that you never come above the ring, because that'll just drive you nuts. You'll be able to see that forever. So make sure that the strip is always flush with or a little bit beneath the ring, because you can always sand it off, right? And I got a bottle of glue here. So now I just put in a little dab of glue. And then I put a little bit of hot glue on the bottom. And I attach it to the first one. And then I'm just going to keep working my way around. And at this point, there really just is no magic to it whatsoever. Just a little bit of patience, that's all. So again, glue, yellow glue, a little bit of hot glue, and on she goes. Now, if you see it, they're trying to pull away from each other a little bit. Just put a little bit of hot glue going right across the top of the two that are trying to pull away. And use your fingers. I would recommend you do it quickly because it's warm. And that'll hold it together. Now at this point, you can get creative. We're just using random strips because the boat is so random that we just thought it would look good. But if you want to go out and get some specialty wood, you know, bloodwood or purple heart or coca-cola or any of those really neat woods, it will surely stand out at this point. All right, that's it. I'm just going to keep on going around, and you can see I'm making sure that my bottoms are always beneath the lip of the boat. All right, well, I figure I got about 200 more of these to go. We've had 24 hours for our yellow glue to dry, and I am just mixing up some clear epoxy right now, and we are going to put fiberglass ring all the way around the inside of this, adding to the strength of our coaming so that we can do a little bit more work on it. You know, you may be tempted to shave all this down because it'll make the fiberglassing a little bit easier, but I just wouldn't do it because I don't think it's strong enough now, and you might start knocking some things around. You just don't want to do that. It's just not that big a deal. So, what do I have here? I've got my gloves because I'll be needing that. We're doing a lot of hand work here. I've got a 1-inch chip brush, and I've got a bunch of little rolls of fiberglass, which I have cut to be just the right height to go all the way around here. And just a little note. We use all scraps to do stuff like this, obviously, and what I've found the best way to cut tape, which is straight and not doing this all the way down, is to roll it up. Just simply roll it up and cut it in the lengths that you need so that it looks like this, right? And you get nice straight cloth that way. Now, don't try to do this with pieces that are too long, because I've done a lot of fiberglassing, and I just don't seem to be able to use pieces much longer than a couple of feet at the most. without them starting to curl up and fall down on me, which is a real pain in the neck. So all I'm doing here now is I am saturating. You know, I hope it goes without saying that came in a little while ago and we've already sanded all this out so that we got a nice smooth surface all the way around. Go ahead and take a piece of cloth and start to unroll it on there. And now I'm just going to go back and put a little more epoxy on there. Alright, so I am going to do that again 3 or 4 more times to get around this boat. And the only other trick here is to make sure you overlap by a couple inches on each one so that you got a nice tight bond there. This fiberglass inside here is good and dry. And what I've done, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I've gone ahead and sanded underneath here just to make it flat, because I know myself, when I do this, I like to grab it here, and you know, I am notorious for getting those little fiberglass splinters in my hand, and they are painful. So I sanded all that down underneath so I can grab that. And if you're going to do that now, just be careful. Just, you know, she's still not at full strength yet, so just be gentle with her. I used an orbital sander and I used 80 grit paper and just ripped it right down. You're going to use a lot of sandpaper because this hot glue is really tough on sandpaper. It gums it up quickly. So all I'm doing now is all these little grooves in here where there's a little bit of ooze of hot glue. I got to get that out of there, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a coaming. We're going to put a coaming together, and it's kind of cool because we're going to do something called cold laminations. But I need to get this out first. So all I do is I take a new razor blade, new and sharp, and I gently go down and I cut underneath each one, being careful not to cut into the wood because that's not my goal. And then I take a nice sharp chisel and I just pop them up. They'll come right off if you do that. Alright, so I'm just going to finish this up. I only got a little bit left to do, and then we're going to take some cellophane tape and get it around this start of the coaming here. One other thing I should say is make sure, and this goes without saying everywhere on the boat, when I sand this down underneath here, now there's wood underneath here that's not sealed or protected by anything. So make sure as you do, you know, when you sand the sides, you got an unprotected edge here, underneath here, all that has to be re-protected using some epoxy that's rolled on or painted on, or however you're going to put it on there. And on the sides here, you may choose to put a piece of fiberglass tape over the side. You know, the tape is the fiberglass is primarily for abrasion. You know, on boats this small, they most definitely add strength to the boat, no doubt about it. But you remember, right here at the corner, we've got a shear clamp all the way around, so it's good and strong there. I'm not worried about strength. But if you think you're going to be, you know, laying your kayak down in the dirt, banging it around, you know, that kind of thing, then you may want to go ahead and put a piece of tape all the way around, just a small piece of tape all the way around, and then layer up with a couple of filler coats of fiberglass and, of epoxy, and then sand it all down smooth. All right, so let me just finish this up so we can get on to the coaming. What I'm doing now is I am taking cellophane packing tape and putting it all around our strips here that are built up to protect them. The reason we're doing this is cold lamination is nothing more than taking thin strips and gluing them together. But we're doing it around some pretty extreme curves here, and you're going to see it's going to bend around nicely. And by putting epoxy in there and bending it around and clamping, tomorrow we'll have a beautiful coaming that'll pop right off of this thing. But before I do that, I got to finish protecting the boat. So this is the dry fitted laminations that we got here. We haven't applied any glue yet, and all it is, again, these are just over a 1/16 of an inch thick. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them stacked together. I like it to be just about a little over a 1/2 inch, so that when you combine it with the strips that we have here, we got about 3/4 of an inch. And you can see by taking multiple laminations, it makes it pliable, flexible, okay? So this is kind of your way of not having to steam this, because steaming it just makes it a whole different kind of project. Now when you're doing this, this is maple, by the way. Maple bends really well. When you're doing this, somewhere along the line, you're gonna have to join it. All right. If you're the kind of person who will just, won't be able to look at where two things join, then you're gonna have to put on one piece at a time, bend it around, glue it, take all the clamps off, put on another piece, bend it around, glue it, stagger the joints, hand cut it in so that you're staggering the joints all the way around, and you can achieve a single piece coaming that way without any joints. Well, I mean, there'll be joints, but they'll be scattered around, and you'll probably notice them a lot less. However, you have an opportunity by joining them, right? So on our really, really big kayaks, like the tandem kayak with one large cockpit, then it's two large pieces joined together, and usually is a decorative piece, or you can butt join them together. On this one here, let's take a look at the back end here. You can see that I've already dry fit all this and pre-cut everything so that I came up pretty much right here in the back end, right? And that's the center. Now, most likely what I'm going to do is, after these are laminated up and dried, I will cut this and I will fit in some kind of a decorative piece. Usually, I don't like to go for a near miss, so I won't take maple and I won't fit it in there. I'll probably get a mahogany or bloodwood or purple heart or something really pretty. Back here is fairly flat, so it'll be easy to fit a piece in, and just a 1/2 inch thick piece of purple heart will look beautiful. Put in there, maybe about that long. It'll look really nice. That way there, it doesn't look like a near miss, right? It doesn't look like a bad joint, doesn't look like a near miss with the same wood. Looks like a decorative piece connecting the two. All right, so again, this is just over 1/16 inch thick. It is maple, and it's a 1/2 inch deep. You could make it bigger if you wanted to, but 1/2 inch for me is about right, because once this is done, we'll be popping this up. We'll be putting a 1/4 inch bead of epoxy all the way around, thickened epoxy, and then we'll be raising this up a 1/4 inch. That way there, if you want to put a skirt, if you want to use a spray skirt, you've got a way to put your drawstring or your snap underneath there. All right, so now it's time to mix some epoxy, and what I'm going to do, I'm happy with the dry fit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to release this all the way back, and then I'm going to start to drop the epoxy in there, and as I go along, I put a little epoxy, connect it, put a little epoxy, connect it, and I do that so I can make sure the epoxy gets down between the pieces. Now, I'm not worried about fully coating every single piece, because you simply don't need to. What I'm going to do is get a good amount in between all the pieces, and then I'm just going to band them all together. That'll dry, we'll flip it over, we'll paint the underside, and it'll be good and strong. All right, so let me start to pull this apart. Okay, so I've got some clear epoxy, not thickened at all, and an acid brush, and I'm going to take and loosen these up. Give that epoxy a chance to run out in between those. And now you can see what the cellophane tape was for. So you want to really make sure that you did a good job, because the last thing in the world you want is this sticking to your boat. And I have here a 1/2 inch chisel, which I have tape on, and I use that so that I can push them down, get them nice and flat. Once we get the first two going here, this will be a lot simpler. Yeah. Okay. All right, so now that I got a couple clamps in there, now I'll just take this and I'll just put my fingers in between them so that they get a little space going. And move on down the line. Now, there are some people who just put them all together and paint the tops. And typically, epoxy will penetrate about 5 millimeters. I just prefer to spend a little extra time, break it up a little bit. I think you get better results that way. And again, I just use the chisel to push things down to the deck height. My goal here is to get this to follow the deck curve all the way around, so that later when I raise it up, the coaming is falling away at the same angle as the deck. I just think it looks better doing it that way. All right, so I'm just going to continue on doing exactly what I am doing. I am going to leave this alone and get the heck out of here, so I am not tempted to touch things and mess them up. All right, we've taken all the clamps off. It's been a day now. I got a wood chisel in my hand. You can hear that popping. Now, what you don't want to do is open it back up again, right? You want to keep it as shut as much as possible. And it just sprang right off of this side. So all I'm going to do is take my chisel and start popping around this side here. Yeah. And if you did your tape job right, it should just release as easy as can be. Isn't that great? So that is cold lamination. All right, again, be careful you don't spread it, break it apart, because the epoxy is brittle. All right, so what we're gonna do now, I'm gonna take this over to a flat bench, and I'm gonna sand the underside, and I'm going to sand the inside, get all that nice and smooth and flat. I'm not gonna worry too much about the top side, because when we put it on, after we trim all this down, we'll be sanding all around the top. And then I need to put it back on, dry fit it, and I'll have to cut this. But before I do that, I gotta take all this tape off. I gotta take a little bit of sandpaper, coarse sandpaper, go around, get all the glue up that's residue from the tape. And I'm gonna put a little fillet on there, and we're gonna have to let that dry before we can touch this again. Couple of new toys to make this happen. We've got some little pieces of strip, 1/4 inch. And the reason for that is just simply to have a spacer. So I got a mark on this on the front I put on there before I took it off. So I know exactly where to start when I put it back on. And then I'm just gonna walk around putting a spacer every few inches or so. So I know I got a nice even gap of 1/4 inch all the way around. So you do have to be careful. Make sure when you're making your fillet underneath there, that it doesn't get too big on you. And of course, before we started this, we sanded everything down so that we got a nice smooth surface that we're attaching this to all the way around. And I know I mentioned this before, but it bears mentioning again. When you're preparing your coaming to go back on permanently, there is no reason to, and in fact it is detrimental, to sand the top and the outside of the coaming. The reason being is one of the next processes that we're going to do involves trimming down the top here, and at that point we're going to have to sand. And there's only so many times that you want to sand these things before you start to lose control of the shape and the body of smaller objects on the boat. So there's no reason to sand it, so don't sand it. All right, well that gets most of this side, so now I'm gonna walk around, tack down the other side, and then we'll fill in the gaps when we're done. Coming up here on the last one, it's gonna get a little bit tough. I know this from experience, so I'm gonna put one there, and I'm gonna be ready to put one right in front of it. Right there. Okay, so as you can see, I have a gap cut out of here, and all I did was, from the center here, I measured out in each direction, and I made a gap that I'm going to come back and fill in with some decorative piece, right? And again, this is, you know, it's not going to add or deteriorate from the strength of your coaming. So you can decide to do this almost any darn way that you want. You know, you can either put in a decorative strip like I'm going to, or you can lap these back and forth and kind of stitch them all together. It's really up to you. But I kind of like this decorative strip stuff. So I am now pretty happy with how I'm looking all the way around here, so I'm going to go back, fill in the gap, and pull out these spaces. There's just a couple more things we got to do before we put this thing to bed for the day. You can see that the epoxy I used is really thin and runny. There's a little bit of thickener in there, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First, it will help to bind. The wood flour is a thickener which does add strength. And it will help to seal any of the gaps, right? Because what I don't want to do, if I use clear and there's any light gaps there and the clear pops up, it'll leave a clear gap, and I don't want to do that. I mean, when all is said and done, we're going to be trimming this all up, and we'll take some lightly thickened epoxy and go back and fill all that in with wood flour so it all blends in really nicely. But what I want to do now, before we finish up, is I got this brush, which I've been using, and a clean brush, and I am going to go around underneath now and go ahead and paint and make sure everything is sealed up nice all the way around. And then when I'm done, I'm going to come back with the clean brush and some rags and some scrapers and clean all this up so that I have the least amount of sanding to do possible.